Welcome back, folks. We're going to turn now to Nevada for another big case that we're tracking here at Court TV, the crash intended to kill case for Jose Gutierrez. Now, he's accused of going 100 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone and intentionally crashing into several vehicles that were stopped at a red light. Now, 3 people were killed in the crash, including his pregnant girlfriend. Investigators believe that Gutierrez caused the crash to end his relationship with her, but the defense says Gutierrez had a seizure right before causing him to crash. Gutierrez was in court for a preliminary hearing last week that we want to bring you now. I want to listen in now to a man who witnessed the crash.
Mr. Cohen, I'm going to direct your attention to November 18th at around 3:25 p.m. Do you remember where you were that day at that time?
Driving home.
You were driving home. And do you recall the street that you were on?
Yeah, I was driving on Cheyenne down to Jones. There's a dispensary there. I live right behind the dispensary.
Okay.
On the corner.
So you said you were driving on Cheyenne headed towards Jones?
Correct.
So would that mean that you were driving eastbound on Cheyenne?
Yes.
Okay. And when you were traveling, about how fast were you going?
About 40 miles an hour, give or take.
Okay. Okay, so around the speed limit, fair to say?
Yeah.
And do you remember what lane of traffic you were in?
The right lane.
The far right lane?
Yeah, I think there are 3 lanes. I was on the right lane.
Okay. Now, on that date at that time, and I apologize, where you were on Cheyenne, is that located here in Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada?
I think. Cheyenne.
Yeah.
9108, the zip code. I'm not sure if it's Clark County or not.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
We'll stipulate the jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Okay. Did something grab your attention when you were traveling on the road?
Yeah, the way he passed me in the car.
Okay. And we're going to kind of break that down a little bit, okay? So what's the first thing that grabbed your attention when you
The
were...
noise.
The noise. And can you describe what noise you heard?
Of a loud engine, like a high RPM.
High RPM.
Yeah, coming. So I look at the back mirror and I see, I didn't know it was him obviously at the time. I see the car coming like in a drug race, passing me. I heard the engine full RPM. It's an old sports car. I know cars. It's an old sports car, so the engine is more louder than a new car. Okay. So I could hear it before it even passed me.
So let's kind of touch on some of that. So fair to say the engine was louder than just your normal car that's driving on the road?
It's an old sports car.
Okay. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that it passed you.
Yeah.
Okay. If you were in the far right lane, does that mean it passed you on the left?
Middle lane.
Okay. But to the left of your car?
Yes, left of my car.
Okay. But it was in the middle lane?
Yes.
And you said it was going fast, right?
Yes, very fast.
Can you estimate how fast it was going?
I don't know, but very fast.
Okay.
I think as fast as the car could go.
Okay. And when this car passed you, do you remember about how far away from Jones you were?
Yes, I was about 200 meters away from Jones. It's was 350 feet, I think.
Okay, 200 meters.
Meters, yeah.
Okay. And did you watch that car all the way as it approached Jones?
Yeah, I was thinking, sorry.
That's okay. When you were watching the car, did you break eye contact with that car?
No, it was crazy. I was thinking to myself, why are you driving so fast? Can't you see the red light in the cars?
Okay.
Now you got to hit the brake full power. And my eyes are looking to see the brake lights. I don't see the brake lights coming up. So I realized I'm going to see tragedy in a second.
Okay.
And that's when it happened.
Okay. So, and I just want to touch on a couple of things that you said again. So, from where you were at, while approaching the light at Cheyenne and Jones, you could see that the light was red.
And I can see the car standing there, too.
Okay, that's a yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
And you saw a bunch of cars that were stopped on Cheyenne before you get to Jones at the intersection? Okay. And you mentioned that when you were watching this vehicle, do you remember what color the vehicle was?
It was a gray, bluish gray kind of.
Okay. And
dark gray.
You said it was like an old school sports car.
Yeah.
Was it like a sedan or an SUV?
No, coupe, 2 doors.
Like a coupe?
Coupe, 2 doors.
Okay. And you said you didn't see any brake lights? correct? Okay, so what's the next thing that you saw?
I heard the impact and I saw a ball of fire. So immediately I called 911, I parked at the Walgreens and ran to help out.
Okay. So, after you see the car collide with, is it multiple other vehicles at the light?
I saw him hitting a white car.
Okay, so.
That was the ball of fire. And then he got into the rest of the cars.
Okay.
But what I've seen vivid was the white car that he hit. The rest was kind of because of the smoke and the fire, so I couldn't see really good after that.
You said you called 911.
Yes.
And at that point, did you get out of your car?
I parked at the Walgreens, which is right on the intersection, and I ran over there.
Okay.
And
So you ran to where this collision?
the mirror. Me and a bunch, everybody.
And what did you see when you got
The
out?
first thing I've seen is the young dead girl. I thought she was the driver. My initial thought was that she was the driver. Only later, only when I was reading the paper, I realized that.
Okay, and so.
I saw the dead woman, the dead young girl,
Okay.
and this guy was kneeling, checking her pulse, and people asked her, she's alive. He went like this with his head, no, and they put the white sheet on her. The thing that caught my memory, the first thing that I saw is her shin bones. Broken, identically sticking out of her skin.
Okay.
And that caught my attention, and I still have that image because I couldn't understand why they're identically broken.
So let me touch on that real quick. So you're saying the lower parts for legs, the bones
shin
were
bones.
clearly broken.
Yeah, the shin.
The bones were actually outside of the skin.
And they were broken identically.
Okay. And where was she at in relation to the silver?
To the car, she was on the right side of the car, about 5 feet away from the car, laying on her back like that.
Okay. So she was on
Dead.
the passenger side of the car?
Yes, about 5 feet from the passenger.
Did you go to any of the other cars?
Yes, there was a black car over there. There was a guy stuck over there. We were trying, there was a bunch of people trying to get him out, and everything was commotion and fast, and then the cops and the fire department came, and they told us, go, 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 we got it.
Okay.
But there were people trying to help.
And so this
There was a
guy.
guy stuck in a car.
Okay. And so this guy who was stuck in the car. So it was a black car.
If I remember correctly, I think it was a black Subaru. I could be wrong. I think it was a hatchback black Subaru, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. What did you do after that?
Once the cop said, go away, we got it, and back up, I just had to go home and relax. I went home, I told my girlfriend, my mom, I kind of told them what happened, and they say, drink a cup of coffee and go back. You got to give a statement that you saw. And that's what I did. I walked back and I gave my information again.
Okay. And when you say give your information, do you give your information to a Metro officer?
Well, I was talking to a Metro officer, and then I had two people from a trauma unit. They came to interview me, asked me if I was traumatic, or I gave them information. And I didn't give any police officer information there. What I did, I called a number that said, if you witnessed the accident, call a number, we need your testimony. I read it on Review Journal. I called that number, I left a message, and a detective called me back.
Okay. Now, in your life, have you ever seen a car drive like that before?
I've never seen anything like this in my life. The only thing that I've seen close to that is I was in 2 wars. I'm from the Middle East originally. I'm from Israel. So I've seen a lot of terror suicide bombers. That was the closest thing that I see. The way he drove into this car is the way a terrorist drives into military base with the explosion in the car.
Why did that remind you of?
Because
suicide
this is
bomber?
what I remember. That's the only thing I can resemble to that from my life experience. I never seen anybody. I've seen accidents, but you see the guy trying to swerve or hit the brake, trying to avoid the accident the last second. There was none of it with this guy.
All right, let's bring back in our guest with us, trial attorney Kearney and Cannon. This is a preliminary hearing, right? So this, talk to us actually a little bit about the standard here, much lower standard. We're very early on in the process here, and the prosecutors are charged with this idea of showing that they have enough evidence to go forward with the case.
That's correct. So essentially here, as you indicated, this is a very low standard. So all that they're doing here is trying to get the judge to understand that a crime was committed and that it's more likely than not the defendant is the one who committed that crime. And so here with the witness identifying the vehicle, I would assume that the prosecution is going to show that the vehicle that the witness identified is the exact vehicle that the defendant was driving. That is enough in itself to say that the defendant, there's probable cause that the defendant actually was the one who committed a crime.
You know what's interesting about this case? As I look at it, the prosecution is saying that this is really about him going after his girlfriend, who the family says was pregnant. So as I think about this case, really, Cannon, this is just a domestic violence case. And we see often these murder-suicides, because one would think to oneself, if you're going to go after your girlfriend, do you go after her in this situation where you drive 100 miles an hour into a car? You must be trying to hurt yourself as well. So I think of this as almost like one of those murder-suicides we see in these domestic violence situations.
Agreed. I mean, it could only be that type of situation or what the witness just said, like a terrorist situation where someone's literally trying to kill people just because they want to ensue terror. But the prosecution has a high burden of showing that this is what they are, that this theory is what is persuasive to a jury. I mean, the witnesses aren't going to be able to say that this individual was trying to kill his girlfriend unless, I mean, maybe somebody took a picture of him screaming and listening to Highway to Hell while he's driving fast. But essentially, there's not going to be a way for that to happen unless the prosecution can show maybe a Facebook Live or maybe a text message from the victim girlfriend who indicates that he won't stop. He's saying he's going to kill me. But there's going to have to be some form of facts specifically to show that this defendant was intending to kill the victim or kill both of them. And I don't know that based on this last witness that they have enough evidence to show that as of today.
All right, I do have to take a break, but I do want to get into, and the next time we talk about this, how the prosecution will go about proving that aspect of the case. So Cannon, stand by. Folks, stick around. Coming up, we're going to hear from another eyewitness who says Gutierrez didn't ask how his pregnant girlfriend was after the crash. Oh, that could be part of it. It's next here on Court TV. Back now to Nevada, where we're watching a hearing in the crash intended to kill case for Jose Gutierrez. The 19-year-old is accused of speeding into a line of stopped cars, ultimately killing 3, including his pregnant girlfriend. The defense claims that Gutierrez suffered a seizure right before the crash, but prosecutors believe the car data tells a different story. Let's head back into court now and listen to testimony from another eyewitness and a former police officer. His name is Grant Black.
I'm going to direct your attention to November 18th at around 3:30 in the afternoon. And that's November 18th of this year. Where were you at?
We were running errands, but I was right there at by the Walgreens on Shane and Jones.
Okay. And is that, sorry. You said we. Who were you with?
Caitlin.
And who's Caitlin with you?
She's a friend of mine.
Okay. Were you guys in the same vehicle?
Yes.
Were you driving?
Yes.
Now, on that date and time when you were at Cheyenne and Jones, did something grab your attention?
Yes, I heard a loud noise, and I saw in the rearview mirror a pretty big cloud of smoke. I needed to flip around anyways and head back to my house. So I turned around and I got to the intersection there, and I saw. As I was driving to the intersection, I could still see all the smoke and everything rising.
Okay.
The vehicle crash.
So you were headed away from the intersection at Cheyenne and Jones?
Yes.
And did you turn around?
Yes.
Okay. Why'd you turn around and come back?
Well, I needed to go back that way anyways to go back to my house, but obviously some sort of event took place. I was on the way, and I figured I'd go look and see if anybody needed help or
Okay, so you thought you might be able to be of assistance
Yes.
because of your background and training, both in the military and at the police officer.
Then just a concerned citizen.
Now, when you got back to the intersection of Cheyenne and Jones, can you just describe what you saw?
Yeah, I saw quite a few vehicles, that would be involved in the wreck, and still saw smoke rising and quite a few pedestrians, kind of out and around in that area.
Okay. Fair to say there was a lot of vehicles both at the intersection that looked like they'd been involved in a collision.
Yeah, it looked like some sort of mass event, casualty event or chaotic event.
Okay. Do you remember approaching a silver sedan or coupe in particular?
I do.
Okay. Describe to me what you remember about that car and who was around that car.
So I got to that car second, and there was a male in the passenger seat, driver's seat. I was in the driver's seat and hit a seatbelt on. There was another individual there with me, and I believe we cut his seatbelt. Yeah, we cut his seatbelt and pulled him out of the car, and did initial triage on him, and I moved on to the other car, to the vehicle.
If you saw him again, do you think you recognize him?
Yes.
Do you see him here in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you please point to him and identify an article of clothing he's wearing?
I can see some orange slippers.
Your Honor, will the record reflect the witness identified?
Taylor.
Okay. And so he was sitting in the driver's seat of the silver coupe sedan.
Correct.
Okay. And you said that you cut the seatbelt?
Yes.
Okay, so he was strapped in,
Yes.
and you actually pulled him out of the driver's seat?
Yes.
Okay. When you pulled him out, can you kind of describe how he was acting?
He was acting like he'd obviously been in a significant crash. He was complaining about his back. In the first encounter, I wasn't really asking him any questions or anything like that. I just wanted to make sure that he didn't have any, other injuries or life-threatening injuries before I moved on to the other car.
Okay. Would you describe him as coherent?
Yes.
And so he actually identified that his back was hurt?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you said the first time, right? Now, at some point, did you leave and then come back?
Yes.
Okay. And just before I get to that, from the time you heard the collision to when you got to the scene, how much time elapsed?
From the time I heard the collision to when I first got there, 2 minutes or so.
Okay. So you were on the scene pretty quick?
Yeah, it was just enough time for me to probably not even go a couple hundred yards to the intersection before I got out of the car.
So you made sure that he was okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. And at some point, I'm assuming you confirmed that he was at least alive and
Yeah, he was conscious and breathing. He was speaking, I needed to go look at the other photos to see where they were at as far as stability goes.
okay. So where's the next place that you went at the scene after you left the silver coupe?
Yeah, so I went around to the passenger side of the car, in between, it would have been on the Walgreens side, where I looked at the female that was on the ground there.
Okay. And did you check to make sure she was okay?
I did.
And was she okay?
No. Looking at her, and I could see that there was significant trauma to her, and for visible signs of life or obvious signs of life. Checking her pulse and her eyes, and I ran my fingers through her hair, and I could see that she's not in a state where I could provide her adequate care on the side of the road there. At least to the capacity that I had. So I made the decision to direct someone to they cover, there was a lot of phones out, and it was a pretty graphic scene, so, respect to her and her family, I didn't want, anybody to be able to continue to post that, so I asked somebody to cover her up, and I probably spent a minute and a half with her before I moved on to the driver of the blue sedan.
Did you see what the person who directed the cover up? Did you see whether that person did cover her up?
I believe I didn't see him actually cover her up because I moved on to the other vehicle. But by the time I had come back or turned around, she was covered up.
Okay, so when you got to her, did you determine that she was deceased?
Based on my training experience, yes.
All right, the horrific nature of the crash really coming across with those first two witnesses. We'll step aside here, take a break. Coming up, we'll have the cross-examination of this witness to the fatal crash. All that and more next here on Court TV. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala, and we are in Nevada this morning watching a hearing for a teen suspected in a 12-car crash that killed 3 people. 19-year-old Jose Gutierrez is accused of purposefully driving his car into a line of stopped cars earlier this year, killing 3, including his pregnant girlfriend, who prosecutors say Gutierrez, he was going about 100 miles an hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone when the crash took place, and he was basically targeting his girlfriend. At least that's what they say. Let's head back into court now, where we're hearing from an eyewitness and a former police officer testify to the defendant's demeanor in the aftermath of the fatal crash.
I cut the airbags to see if there was any occupants inside.
Okay. Do you remember what kind of car that was?
No, again, when the photo was shown, I could not see that it was a gray vehicle, but I wasn't really looking for the car as much as just
But there was an occupant in the vehicle.
Correct.
And you remember there was a male or female? Okay. And was he still alive when you checked on him?
I believe he was the first vehicle that I went to, and that was the first airbag on the passenger side that I cut. And I checked for a pulse on him. He had a pulse. He was unconscious but still breathing. And then moved on. And by the time I got back to him, I wasn't able to check his pulse, but I could still see a rise of his chest, from the driver's side of the vehicle looking in.
Now, I want to go to when you came back to the silver coupe and the defendant. You mentioned you went and you made 2 times you contacted him, right? Yes. So the second time, can you describe kind of what you witnessed and how the defendant was acting then?
Yes, I came back to him, and at that time I'd taken out some medical supplies and was, in reassessing his, state, and was wiping some blood, from his brow, and I saw some other lacerations on the back of his right arm. I put him, into like a recovery, position, he could still breathe and things like that, but he kept on saying his back was hurting. And then there was another female on scene that was on the phone, and I later found out that it was his mother, I believe, that he was on the phone with.
Did he identify himself to you?
He did. I asked him his name. He said his name was Jose.
Mr. Black, so you said you had a second contact of the defendant here, Jose, and I kind of missed what you were saying. You said another female was on the phone and it was his mom. Can you explain that?
So there was a female bystander that was on her phone, and I know she was trying to talk to him quite a few times. And they were, I don't know if they were conversing back and forth, and I was focused on his injuries. But at a later time, Caitlin, the girl who was with me, she had told me that he was on the phone with his mother.
Who was on?
He had given a phone number to the lady that was there, a bystander she was on the phone with his mother.
With the defendant's mother?
Yes.
So there was a bystander who was on the phone, and you later learned that the defendant's mother is likely on the line?
Yes.
And what did that bystander look like?
I would say Hispanic, dark hair. I didn't pay too much attention to her. I just know that I did hear her speaking Spanish.
And so the only interaction you had with the defendant that day was the first time coming up to him and he was complaining about his back, you said?
Yeah, after I pulled him out of the car, I didn't speak to him right away, but when I pulled him out of the car, I heard him say that his back was hurting.
Okay. And then after you went to the other vehicle to render date, you came back to the defendant?
Yes.
And that's when you asked him what his name was?
Yes.
And that's also, did you ask him what his injuries were?
I was looking at his injuries and I asked him if he was, having any other pain elsewhere, just to kind of keep him talking, I guess, conscious, right, and trying to figure out if there's anything else that could be going on.
Right, because as part of your training, you don't want somebody to go unconscious if you can help them.
No.
Right? And so how long would you say you talked to a defendant?
I stayed there for, when I came back the second time, I stayed there for a considerable amount of time. I'd say at least 3 or 4 minutes. Maybe a little longer.
And during that time, you were trying to converse with the defendant?
Yes.
And so can you tell the court what, if any, recollection you have of any conversation that you had with the defendant?
It was just, again, me asking him about his injuries and, trying to keep him calm and so on and things like that. But there was there wasn't any, conversation. Just saying, my back's hurting, my back. So that was all I really got.
Okay. What would you say, how would you describe his demeanor to the court? Was he crying in pain? How would you describe it?
I couldn't necessarily say that he was crying or I wasn't really looking for that, but I mean, he was in considerable amount of pain. He seemed to have his bell rung, but he wasn't in a state of where I felt that he was deteriorating or getting any worse, or losing consciousness or at any point or anything like that.
So when you say he was in a considerable amount of pain, what observations lead you to that conclusion?
Just him, yelling, speaking pretty loudly. He wasn't screaming or anything. He was just telling me his back was hurting. My back, bro, my back, so. Okay.
And you said you came across first, you found the deceased female on the passenger side of that same vehicle. Were you aware that she was a passenger in that car?
Not at the time, but as I was looking at everything, the totality, I guess, the circumstances and my experience and training, I believe that she was.
And what led you to that belief?
Her body positioning, and the considerable damage to the passenger side of the vehicle, leading into, if there was an occupant, right, it just looked,
You just put 2 and 2 together?
Yeah, it seemed to be that way.
Did he ever ask about the passenger's vehicle when you were interacting with him for a few minutes?
No.
No further questions, John?
Incredible that the kid could drive into all these cars, Cannon, with 100 miles an hour and only have some broken ribs and a broken wrist. It's just the way these things play out. Again, still with us, trial attorney Cannon Kearney. And Cannon, defense attorneys like preliminary hearings like this because we just saw the cross-examination. And really, for defense attorneys, these are difficult burdens for them. They're not going to, this case is moving forward regardless. But it's an opportunity to gain information and maybe have a dry run at some of these cross-examinations.
Agreed. It gets, Michael, it gets the defense an opportunity to see what the prosecution may know, but they haven't already provided to the defense. Because at this point, everything hasn't been exchanged between the parties. So this gives them a clear opportunity to get a bird's eye view of what the witnesses are for this matter, what the evidence the prosecution has at this time, and who may be potential witnesses. Because as we've heard, there's a young lady now who was speaking to his mother allegedly. So maybe that's another witness that the defense might want to speak to in order to see exactly what was said to her for her to make the phone call to the mother allegedly. So again, yes, Michael, you hit it on the head. This is an opportunity to kind of get a better understanding of the lay of the land of what's to come.
All right, Cannon, I got about 20 seconds. This has been charged as a first-degree murder case. Any chance this could be anything less than that?
Yeah, I'm seeing vehicular homicide or maybe like negligent homicide. I don't know that there's going to be enough evidence to charge with first-degree murder, Michael.
All right, we'll have to see what all the evidence is. Cannon Kearney, thank you so much for joining me today. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Folks, stick around because coming up, we're going to hear from a detective who says that Jose Gutierrez reached speeds of 100 miles per hour before the crash. Keep it here on Court TV. This is Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala, in for Ted Rollins today. We are in Nevada right now this afternoon following a hearing in the crash intended to kill case for Jose Gutierrez. Now, he's accused of going 100 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone and intentionally crashing into several vehicles that were stopped at a red light. Now, 3 people were killed in the crash, including his pregnant girlfriend. Investigators believe that Gutierrez caused the crash to end his relationship with her, but the defense says Gutierrez had a seizure right before causing him to crash. Gutierrez was in court for a preliminary hearing last week that we want to bring to you now. Let's listen now to a detective with the Fatal Collision Unit.
Detective Solomon, is one of your duties and responsibilities as a Metro Fatal officer to do what's called a speed analysis?
Yes, I try and conduct them on crashes when I'm able to. It just honestly depends on the dynamics of the collision, the vehicles involved, just all the overall circumstances to the case.
Okay. And to be clear, are there multiple methods used to conduct a speed analysis?
There are. It truly depends on the individual collision, meaning what way you'll need, or what method you'll need to use to reconstruct speeds.
Okay. Now, about how many times would you say have you done a speed analysis for a collision scene that you were called out to as a fatal detective?
I would guess somewhere in the hundreds. Like I said, it really depends on the case, and sometimes if I'm able to, we'll use multiple methods on the same case, so it could be more. I never really kept track of that number.
And did you do a speed analysis for this investigation in this case?
I did. I used Tracker. It's an open source physics program that allows you to find the velocity, or which you can convert into speed, of a moving object in video.
Okay. Have you used Tracker before?
I have, and actually a colleague and I found it several years ago, and we did some testing at Metro Traffic where we made videos of kind of like a control, more in a science, from a science type aspect of vehicles traveling at set speeds that was confirmed with using radar guns and moving over video, and then took those same videos and put them into the Tracker program to kind of get a baseline to see how it worked. And it worked with the speeds that were on the radar gun. It would come in velocities, and then you change that to miles per hour. So we vetted how it worked.
Okay, and when you vetted how it worked, did you find that the results of using this system and using this method to be accurate?
I did.
Okay. So you mentioned you used the Tracker system when it came to this investigation. Is Tracker a system that you use with your computer?
Yes, it's a computer program that you load the video into it, and then there's a process to follow, and it will give you velocities of the object that you're tracking across the screen.
Okay. Showing the witness what's been marked as Detective Solomon, do you recognize State's Exhibits 2 and 3?
I do. These are screenshots that I took of Tracker and an Excel spreadsheet that I used to switch the velocities into the miles per hour.
And when you use this tracker system, did you use it in conjunction with the video that was obtained of Cheyenne?
Yes, I did. One was from the Las Vegas Worship Center, and the second one was from the Northwest Pet Hospital, I believe.
Okay, and the Worship Center, to be clear, would be State's Exhibit 3, and the Pet Hospital would be State's Exhibit 2. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you kind of just describe what we're looking at and how the system works based on what's shown in the screenshot there?
Yeah, this is the time that I took the screenshot was after I selected the points that are tracked moving across the video image. And then I believe there were 6 of them. And from those 6 tracks, you get 5 velocities. Then take the velocities, put them into the Excel spreadsheet. It averages out the velocities and then converts the velocities into miles per hour. And that first one shows 94.8 miles an hour from the Las Vegas Worship Center.
I'll get to that in a second, but Your Honor, I move to admit State's Exhibits 2 and 3.
Mr. Moskow?
No objection.
They'll be admitted.
So the Worship Center, is that, and in comparison to the Pet Hospital, is that further away from the intersection of Cheyenne and Jones?
Yes, the Las Vegas Worship Center is further west than Cheyenne and Jones.
And what was the miles per hour from the Worship Center?
Like I said before, 94.8.
Okay. And moving on to State's Exhibit 2, this is from the Pet Hospital, right?
Correct.
Okay. And this one is closer to the intersection of Cheyenne and Jones, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you use the tracker system in conjunction with the video evidence, what was the clocked miles per hour of the suspect vehicle?
108.9 miles an hour.
Past witness, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I am going to lodge an objection to the detective's testimony on this tracker software. This is expert testimony that really needs a scientific basis to be put in, and he's basically testified that he and his team ran a quick and dirty test a few years ago to see if it was accurate enough to use, and now they're submitting these speed workups, these speed things from the software here in court at 94 miles an hour, 109 miles an hour. And really even testified that he didn't even confirm that the frame rates from the videos were actually the correct frame rates that were used by the software, Your Honor. So I think this is expert testimony. I don't think Detective Solomon will survive a Hallmark challenge to be able to testify as to how the software works. And based on that, I'm going to object to Exhibits 2 and 3.
State.
Your Honor, so as the judge, you can determine the amount of weight you want to give to this evidence. And I think Mr. Moskow's argument essentially goes to weight. I understand his argument what he's attacking, but Detective Solomon testified both on direct and cross that when they independently tested the software, it was determined to be accurate with multiple different types of vehicles, at multiple different types of speeds. So he can testify that, yes, I've tested this software and it's accurate. As to the frame rates, I think as Detective Solomon pointed out, he didn't mess with the frame rates because the software automatically does it. So if he was to mess with the frame rates, that would be a variable that might cause an inaccurate reading from the software. So I think as the judge, I think this goes to the weight of the evidence, not its admissibility, and State's Exhibits 2 and 3 are already admitted, and I think his independent testing and his testimony today has been sufficient.
If I could just respond to that. This is not a weight of the evidence argument here. This is expert testimony. This is not lay testimony that he's offering. And he is an expert in accident reconstruction on certain things, but he testified, I asked him, he said he's never been formally trained by Metro. They never take classes on how to use this software. He and his partner found the software on the internet. They took their team out, did one day of tests a few years ago. And he also testified that I'm not asking him to mess with the frame rates. I asked, did you confirm that the right frame rates that are on the video files were the frame rates used by the software? And he said, no, he didn't confirm that. And so these are highly suspect things, not to attack the rater, but he has not established that he's qualified as an expert in how the software actually works, and he's never even been trained by anybody who is an expert on how the software actually works. And so that's the reason for the objection here. I think you need somebody to actually come in who's a qualified expert and testify as to how this software works and that it's actually being used right. Right now we have a witness on the stand who's he's doing his job to the best of his ability and using the tools that he has, but this is a tool that they don't have formal training on. And this is a tool that he does not know how it internally works itself. And so what we have is the state just admitting 2 screenshots that have numbers on them. And the Detective Solomon can't really explain to the court that these numbers are completely accurate and how the software works to come up with these numbers. I was confused myself when he was trying to explain it earlier. I asked for the explanation again. And what we have now is an officer who's not trained in how to use this, did not confirm the numbers that went into this. And this is being offered as hard evidence by the state as to speed. I think the video speaks for itself. I think the court can look at the speed of the car on the video. But as to these exact numbers of 94.8 to 108.9, they're highly suspect.
Your Honor, just briefly, the only thing I'll add, Your Honor, is that I think even Mr. Moskal can see that he is an expert in accident reconstruction. I think that was sufficient. The foundation was sufficiently laid. And what he has testified today is that based on his training and experience, both as a fatal officer and as an expert in accident reconstruction and using independent testing of the software is accurate. So I think he can testify to all of that based on his training and experience and the fact that he is an expert in using these methods for speed and accident reconstruction.
Last word, Mr. Moskal?
Yeah, the foundation has not been laid for him to offer expert testimony as to how this software works and that it was used properly.
Okay, so I believe that Detective Solomon is an expert in accident reconstruction and the investigation that he's doing. I believe that this was a tool that he used, that he has over the years, that he has used it, checked it, and it's been accurate. I wouldn't call it a down and dirty test, but I do think that, at least for purposes of preliminary hearing, this goes to, it really does go to weight, not admissibility. It's just one thing that is plugged in, and it's a tool that he used, and it's a small tool that he used to support, I assume, what's going to be an ultimate conclusion. So it is admissible, and you can litigate it in district court.
All right, so they're going to allow that testimony in. We'll take a break here, but before we do, I have a quick programming note for you. Don't miss the Reiner Family Murders, Court TV special airing tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Court TV lead anchor Vinnie Politan takes us inside the murder investigation that shocked the country, while we get a live look from the scene of the crime from field reporter Cody Thomas. You don't want to miss it. That's tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll be right back after this break. Keep it here on Court TV.
I'm going to ask you a lot of intensely personal questions.
From the crime scene to the courtroom, this is Victim to Verdict.
Everyone has this heightened sense of anticipation.
What a day here at Court TV.
Fireworks both inside and outside the courthouse.
Let the cameras roll.
All right, folks, we'll get you back to court in just a minute. But first, here's a quick look at some of the other cases that we're tracking here at Court TV. In California, it is now day 3 of jury deliberations for a mother accused of leaving her 2 young sons in a hot car while she got lip filler. And in New York, Luigi Mangione is back in court today for what's expected to be the final day of a weeks-long suppression hearing. No cameras in that courtroom, but we'll have updates throughout the day. And we are in Kentucky. We're standing by where former Sheriff Sean Mickey Steins is back in court next hour for a hearing to discuss several motions, including the state's motion for a change of venue. Of course, we'll keep you updated on all those trials throughout the day. But for now, we're going to head back to Nevada, where we've been watching a hearing in the crash intended to kill case for Jose Gutierrez. The 19-year-old is accused of speeding into a line of stopped cars, ultimately killing 3, including his pregnant girlfriend. Now, the defense claims that Gutierrez suffered a seizure right before the crash, but prosecutors believe the car data tells a different story and that he might have been targeting his girlfriend. Let's head back into court now, where a trauma surgeon who treated the defendant has just taken the stand.
Now, I want to direct your attention to November 18th of this year. Were you working in your capacity as a trauma surgeon at UMC on that date?
Yes, sir.
And specifically, I want to direct your attention to the afternoon. That afternoon, do you recall getting a number of patients into the emergency room?
Yes, I did. I sit next to the ER doc and the unit clerk, and right behind us is the tele, so I get advance notice on anything that may or may not get activated. And we had a call from EMS, so they had multi-car collisions with multiple casualties, and they were bringing us the first of 3.
Okay. So, I guess that first group, you had 3 patients come into the emergency room, right? Do you recall one of those patients by the name of Jose Gutierrez?
Yes.
Okay. Would you identify, or would you be able to identify him if you saw him?
Yes, he's sitting right over here.
Okay. Your record will reflect the witness identified.
That'll reflect.
Okay. So you saw Mr. Gutierrez on the afternoon of the 18th, right?
Correct.
And when he was coming into the emergency room, can you describe his state of well-being, what kind of injuries he had when he was coming in?
Yes, he was, of the 3 we had, he was probably the least injured. He came to us, he had obvious deformity in his right arm with like an open fracture. He was awake and alert, following commands, and complaining of also sort of low to mid back pain posteriorly, and then had generalized abdominal pain and some issues we thought with his breathing, especially on the left side.
Okay. So based on all of that, did you come up with a kind of a treatment plan for Mr. Gutierrez?
We do. We follow a fairly strict algorithm so we don't miss anything. But I always have one of my residents will start and do head to toe, and the first thing they'll do is they'll assess someone's what we call their Glasgow Coma Scale, or GCS, and it's a metric that looks at whether people are opening their eyes spontaneously, whether they open a voice, whether they don't open them at all, whether they're like answering questions or just moaning incomprehensibly, and if they're moving extremities following commands. And so his GCS was 15, meaning like my GCS is 15 right now.
Okay. Can you kind of describe what that score actually signifies, GCS 15?
It tells us the level of consciousness that a patient has and or their neurologic function. So it does both things. So like if someone comes in and their eyes are open, that means that they're looking around, they're obviously awake. If you have to shout at them or talk to them and get them to open their eyes, or you have to give them sternal rub and they might open an eye, it's giving you a sense of like, do they have a traumatic brain injury? And then following motor commands is like, can they give you a thumbs up? Or do they only do things like, things are getting worse when you're starting to posture or extend, meaning you're having injuries with the brain stem. So it's a standardized thing now in the medical literature. We always try to see if we can come up with something better, but it works really well quickly to assess the status of a patient. As a trauma surgeon, what I'm always looking for is this person able to protect their airway? And if they're not, then I need to intubate them so I can protect their airway for them.
Gotcha, okay. And so you mentioned his score was GCS 15, and your score would be GCS.
That's a normal. Now, not to say that he wasn't injured, but his brain was intact and he was able to follow commands and answer questions.
Okay. So based on the injuries that he did have, did you come up with a specific treatment plan for those injuries, specifically to his back, his arm, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, actually, his biggest injuries at the time when we first evaluated him was he had chest trauma, posterior chest trauma. He had absent breath sounds on the left, so we wound up putting in a tube to evacuate the air in his chest. And then when we were able to, at that point, we felt he was stable. I had some x-rays that showed some rib fractures and looked like pulmonary contusions. We took him to our CT scanner and obtained what we call cross-sectional imaging, where we can look inside the body with x-rays and like create almost like a three-dimensional view. And at that point, we found that he had posterior rib fractures. He had an injury to his liver, injury to one of his kidneys, an injury to his spleen that weren't life-threatening, they weren't actively bleeding, and then some pulmonary contusions. And then ultimately we saw that he had this, we got more imaging of the right arm that showed he had open radius and ulnar fractures.
Okay. So based on all of those injuries and the tests that you ran, I'm assuming he was admitted to the hospital, right?
Yes, he was.
And were you labeled as the admitting physician for Mr. Gutierrez?
Yes.
Okay. Were you also labeled as the attending physician for Mr. Gutierrez?
Yes, I was.
Right, let's bring in our guest for this hour. Joining us to discuss from the great state of Minnesota, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Jack Rice. Jack, great to see you as always. Wanted to check in about this preliminary hearing. Oftentimes in these preliminary hearings, prosecutors want to keep stuff a little closer to the vest, right? Just enough to get them over that line of probable cause to get this case to move forward. Here we're hearing from a trauma surgeon who treated the defendant. Any ideas of why we're hearing from this particular witness? I imagine it might have something to do with the claim by the defense that this was a seizure situation rather than some sort of intentional act.
I think so too, and you're right, Michael, that the strategy here for the prosecution is to give the court enough and no more than enough, because obviously you show everything that you've got. It gives the defense the opportunity to pivot. And I can tell you, I'm shockingly jealous of this. In my jurisdiction, generally speaking, we don't get this. And so as a result, we walk into trials frequently almost blind. We get discovery, but these are pieces of paper that have words on them. You don't get live testimony that gives you the ability to assess what somebody looks like, how something works. It's a much different scenario, and it can potentially change the strategy of a case.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's a real boon for defense attorneys, and I would advocate that this should happen in every state, to be honest with you, to sort of even out the system, because oftentimes it is weighted in favor of prosecutors. In this particular case, Jack, there's an intentionality part that the prosecutors have to prove because they have charged first-degree murder. At its essence, it feels like a domestic violence case, according to what the prosecutors are claiming. What are your thoughts on this idea of proving the intentionality in this particular case?
Yeah, that may actually be the most challenging aspect of the case. I mean, one of the criticisms I have, not in this case, but in general, is that sometimes I will see prosecutors overreach, and they will charge at a higher level than I think they may actually be able to prove. Now, sometimes that's done because they think they have the evidence, but sometimes it's actually done as a process to drive the defense to resolve a case. And sometimes what you have here is the extraordinary trauma that comes with the idea of actually trying that case, because sometimes you have a first-degree charge, you may be looking at life in prison, and almost certainly so, versus that second degree, or whether that's a manslaughter case or criminal vehicular homicide case. Those are always different, and they don't come with that intentionality.
Yeah, fair enough. And just as a point, this is a first-degree murder case, and it is going before a death review committee to figure out if they want to charge or have death as a possible penalty in this case. It hasn't been decided, so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But interesting points. All right, Jack, stand by. Folks, stick around. Coming up, more from the trauma surgeon in the hearing for Jose Gutierrez. Plus, Brian Walsh was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole today. Court TV's Matt Johnson joins us live from Massachusetts, and that's next. Keep it here on Court TV. Welcome back. You're watching Court TV. I'm Michael Ayala in today for Ted Rowlands. Turning now to Dedham, Massachusetts, where Brian Walsh has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for killing his missing wife. Now, Anna was last seen alive on New Year's Eve back in 2023, and prosecutors argued at trial that Brian killed her believing that she was having an affair, then dismembered and disposed of her body, which has never been found. Let's go now to Dedham, where we find Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson. And Matt, the judge called Walsh barbaric today in court. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was a big moment in court today. The judge not holding back as she called him barbaric for what he did to his wife, killing her, then dismembering her, dispersing of her remains. That statement made before she handed down that life sentence without the possibility of parole. Let's watch.
As to the nature and circumstances of count 3, the improper disposal of Anna Walsh's body, the seriousness of your acts cannot be overstated. Your acts in dismembering your wife's body and disposing of her remains in multiple area dumpsters can only be described as barbaric and incomprehensible. You had no regard for the lifelong mental harm that your criminal acts inflicted on your then 2-, 4-, and 6-year-old sons, not only in taking their mother, but also, as is specific to this charge, in never being able to properly grieve that loss, to say goodbye to their mom.
Very tense moment in court today. Look at this. New video into our newsroom. Brian Walsh, convicted killer, going to serve life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Shackles and handcuffs being let out. Extra deputies with him this time, not saying a word, just like he didn't give a statement in elocution or make any remarks in court before the sentencing today, addressing the court. Why did he kill his wife? What did he do with her remains? She can never have that proper burial that her family wants so dearly, Michael.
And Matt, we also saw Anna Walsh's sister on the stand. What stood out to you from her statement to the court?
Alexandra made the trip from Canada. That's the reason why this sentencing was postponed by an entire day, so that she could be here. And wow, it was just so powerful. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. She had a written statement. She walked up to the witness box, and then at one point in time, the judge, she got up from her seat at the bench and she walked over to the edge and leaned over so that she could see the tears welling up in this witness's eyes, Anna Walsh's sister, as the sister looked at that killer across the room and made this statement.
Anna was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Her life was unfairly taken. We asked the court to consider the permanent, long-lasting impact this loss has had on our family. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share the full weight of this incomprehensible act. Anna will never be forgotten. We will carry her light and her memory with us forever.
Never forgotten, always in their hearts. All right, take a look at this. So as she exited the courthouse, the reporters were trying to ask her questions about facing her sister's killer. She wasn't answering those questions. We know that she made the statement to prosecutors that she believes that justice has been served. Outside the courthouse on the steps, she did answer one question. She said that she was here to honor her sister and be the voice for her sister, Anna. Michael?
Yeah, and kudos to the court for waiting that day so she could have that opportunity. And Matt, I understand you were able to catch up with Brian Walsh's mother. She was in court pretty much the entire trial. After today's hearing, did she have to say anything?
Yeah, par for the course, not answering my questions yet again. I ask her each and every day if she would like to make a statement. She's been in court for the 8 days of the trial, listening to those 48 witnesses that took the stand. She's been supporting her son, wearing a brooch that he gave her each and every day. One day she was trying to pass him a note. That was the beginning of the trial. And today the judge remarked about the letter that she submitted, a character letter in behalf of her son. And the judge said, I don't agree with this letter at all. She didn't read it out loud. But I asked Diana Walsh about that as she left court today. Take a listen. Mrs. Walsh, did you hire a private investigator to look after Anna after you visited a spiritual advisor? Do you still believe that your son is innocent? What was in the letter that you wrote, Mrs. Walsh? What was in that letter?
Anything you want to say about your grandsons?
Did you know that her body was in the home when you came to visit? What will happen with the children? Inside the courtroom, this convicted killer who killed his wife, dismembered her, and then tossed her remains like trash, according to prosecutors. When he left today, he didn't look in the direction of his mom, and he usually does each and every day. He usually glances over at her and says something to her. Today, he didn't look in her direction, and they had no moment, is what she tries to create each and every day. Now he's going to just see 4 walls for the rest of his life as he heads to prison, Michael.
Yeah, and Matt, he's already had some issues in jail a little earlier. We'll see how prison works out for him. All right, Matt, thank you so much for that report. Appreciate it. Live from Dedham, Massachusetts. Let's bring in our guest still with us, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Jack Rice. And Jack, you know, Mom was always this sort of shadowy figure in this case, in my mind. But, you know, the machine that is the criminal justice system sometimes can be a little harsh. But I got to say, as I mentioned, and I want to get your thoughts, kudos to the system for waiting that extra day to give the sister the opportunity to deliver that victim impact statement live and in court.
Yeah, no question, Michael. When we think about this system as a whole, I mean, we deal with tragedy every day, and we deal with it in countless numbers. It's not just once, it's hundreds of times over decades and decades and decades. And sometimes we can be flattened by what that means. The brutality of what that means in an individual or in a family's life, that's a reality. And sometimes that is what brings us back into the reality of what it means too. And you realize just how critically important a sentencing is. And in many ways, the most important part of the sentencing really are the voices that get to be heard, finally. They get to talk about the person that was stolen, the person that was taken, the brutality that was placed upon that person, and really to air out what this means for them, for their families, and most importantly, the memory of that person that they never get to hold ever again.
Now, based on that first-degree murder conviction by this jury, Jack, the court had no option. It was life without parole. But the rhetoric of the judge, I think, was pretty strong. You don't often hear judges call defendants barbaric. Love to get your thoughts on that.
Oh, no question about that. And remember, this is one of those aspects where you realize the humanity in the judge and the brutality of what this meant. And what you will sometimes see is the judge who was always trying to remain professional. But I also think there was something about this case that hit this judge personally. And if you listen to the sentencing as you just aired it, the notion of what he did by cutting her to pieces and then placing her in various parts of the city so she could never be found, what that does to a child, the ability to never be able to get true closure. For some reason, that piece, even over the murder itself, was something that this judge grabbed upon in a way that I thought was really startling. And at the same time, it makes us all remember we are all humans trying to work in a very imperfect world and in a very brutal system that deals with this kind of brutality every day.
Yeah, no question, Jack. And again, Brian Walsh sentenced to life in prison. As the judge said, your natural life. You will be in prison for your natural life. All right, Jack, stand by. We'll take a break here, folks. Coming up, we're going to head back to Nevada for more of the hearing in the crash intended to kill case for Jose Gutierrez. We'll be right back. Keep it here on your front row seat to justice.
Coming soon to Court TV.
The Microsoft executive gunned down.
Now his ex and her new husband are charged with his murder.
I'm gonna kill her.
An alleged murder plot involving a family's au pair and the married father she worked for.
A social media sensation, now a suspected killer.
Why do you have something against me?
She wrote a children's book about her husband's death. Now she's accused of killing him.
The high-stakes trials you don't want to miss. Coming soon, only on Court TV.
We have some breaking news out of Florida where a judge has denied Courtney Clenny bond ahead of her newly scheduled trial date. The former OnlyFans model appeared in court today where the attorneys discussed several motions, including a motion to dismiss, which the judge also denied. The judge then set a trial date for April 16, 2026, and that trial is expected to last about 2 weeks. Clenny is claiming self-defense in the fatal stabbing of her boyfriend, Christian Abumseli, and we, of course, will keep you updated with any new developments coming out of there. All right, we're going to head back now to Nevada, where we've been watching a hearing for a teen accused in a deadly car crash. 19-year-old Jose Gutierrez is accused of speeding into a line of parked cars earlier this year, killing 3 and injuring others. Now, prosecutors say the motive was to kill Gutierrez's pregnant girlfriend, who was sitting in the passenger seat of his car at the time. Let's head back into court now, where we've been listening to testimony from the trauma surgeon who treated Gutierrez after that fatal crash.
Can you describe the difference between admitting and attending and what those mean?
I can. Usually, and for the trauma service, it's rare that the attending physician and the admitting physician are different. The exceptions would be, I may be the attending physician, but like as a kid going to the pediatric ICU, would then be admitted to the pediatric intensivist. For all intents and purposes, like for Mr. Gutierrez's state, we sent him to the ICU because of his lung injuries and rib fractures, and that he had these 3 solid organ injuries. So I was the attending a record and the admitting attending, but he actually fell under the service of the ICU attending. So you'll see on there, I think, a Dr. Jamie Humberger is also one of the attendings.
Okay, but you were the attending when he just comes into the emergency room.
Yeah.
He's admitted. Okay. Now I want to talk about seizures. During your experience as a doctor and in your medical training, have you come across people who have had seizures?
Yes.
Okay. Fair to say more than one?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when someone has a seizure, immediately after they have a seizure, do they go into something called a post-ictal state?
Depending on the type of seizure, yes. And the type I usually see, yes, they're post-ictal.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever witnessed someone have a seizure and not go into a post-ictal state?
Not in my experience.
Okay. Can you describe what a post-ictal state is?
So a post-ictal state is, to go back, there's the pre-ictal in seizures where some people will have an aura, they'll have a smell, some people have different things. There's a broad spectrum of how people behave. Then there's the ictal state where they're actually experiencing the seizure. And that's in most of the seizures I see, because I treat adults and in trauma, people will have what you classically see in the movies where they have sort of that myoclonic or tonic-clonic where they get rigid, they're spasming, and they're not aware of what's going on. And then afterwards they appear confused as if like they've woken up from a nap or they hit their head and they're concussed and they look around but they're not answering questions and they're not interactive.
Okay. And how long does the post-ictal state typically last?
In my experience, it's anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes.
Okay. So obviously 5 to 15 minutes, not a long time, but still it always happens after the seizure, right?
Yes.
For at least 5 minutes. You mentioned that when people are in this state, they're not answering questions.
Correct.
Are they able to communicate verbally with other people?
No, they were like looking at the Glasgow coma scale. It's either incomprehensible words or groaning kind of sounds, if they're making any sounds at all.
Okay. What about like reciting things from memory? Would a person in a post-ictal state be able to recite something from memory?
Not that I would be aware of. I can't.
Okay. And like you said, would you describe this person as not coherent?
Correct.
Okay. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Press.
So you said it depends on the type of seizure.
Absolutely, correct.
And you said you've seen seizures multiple times in your career, but Seizure is an area of medicine. Epilepsy is an area of medicine, an area that you specialize in?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
That would be a neurologist.
And how much experience would you say you have with epilepsy treatment?
I treat acute epilepsies in the pre-hospital or in the hospital setting when people are actually in what's called status epilepticus, where they're having these tonic-clonic seizures, because the goal is you want to break those as quickly as possible.
And what's a tonic-clonic seizure?
Where people are, there's a whole list, but it's where your muscles are going through like this rhythmic spasming, and the person's not in control of their nervous system.
Okay. What other types of seizures are there?
There's everything from, our little kids get febrile seizures to things that are related to inborn errors like genetic mutations to mostly in the adult population. The people we see them in are people who are withdrawing from alcohol, and you get them in people who are on certain medications or certain drugs that can have them, or it's the result of previous trauma to the brain or strokes. And then there's you'd have to talk to a neurologist. There's a giant laundry list of things. My friends who are neurologists, they say it's really, seizures are sort of a physical manifestation of something that's going on structurally or biochemically within the brain, but it's a broad spectrum of things that can cause seizure disorder.
So there's all different types?
There's all different types, yeah.
And when you're referring to this pre-ictal, ictal, and post-ictal state, that doesn't apply to all types?
You'd have to ask a neurologist. It's used a lot to describe seizures, but I don't know if people who are having febrile seizures, if those kids have a pre-ictal state or not. I couldn't answer that for you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And we might be out of your area of expertise, so just say if
sure.
you are. But if a person has seizures, how would medical diagnose somebody with epilepsy?
Well, my experience from having patients who we thought had seizures is we get neurology involved. They will usually do a long-standing EEG where they put electrodes on the scalp and pick up on the electrical activity of all the hemispheres of the brain. And they can tell from those sometimes if there's underlying seizure disorders. They also will obtain cross-sectional imaging. CT scans are the first step, but really they'll go to an MRI of the brain to look for structural defects.
Okay. And you said an ECG measures electrical?
EEG.
EEG.
Electroencephalogram.
And is that something that's normally done as part of the process when somebody comes to the ER for a trauma surgery?
No, that would be done once they get into the ICU if there was concern for ongoing seizure activity, especially in a intubated and sedated patient, because one of the risks we have in critical care is that you can have a patient that is in a seizure that's unrecognized and not treated, and they can literally, if you don't interrupt and I'm probably paraphrasing this, where a neurologist would like this, but basically the electrical storm that's going on in the brain can cause permanent damage. So the idea is you need to break that, and the goal is you try to break those seizures within 60 minutes or sooner if you can, and you keep escalating the medication that you would use to try to break the seizure. But sometimes the only way to tell that is with an EEG.
And does the EEG have to be done within a certain amount of time to be effective?
You mean to diagnose it?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I think you need to know what's happening.
Well, let's say somebody has a seizure.
Yes.
How soon after does an EEG need to be done?
I think I see what you're saying. So if it's like a witness seizure, like a patient that I'm treating and I watch them and they go into an obvious seizure, not one of the non-obvious seizures, we would break them from the seizure with medications. Once that was done, we would admit them and then we would ask neurology to see them, and then they would do an EEG sometime within the first 24 hours.
Okay. And what if somebody has a seizure disorder and they suffered a seizure days prior? Would an EEG still be able to confirm that they're suffering from epilepsy, or is there kind of a...
I don't know the
wouldn't be conclusive at that point?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you for being on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, if this is out of your depth, just say so. The post-ictal state on direct examination, you said lasts between 5 and 15 minutes.
That's been my experience with the type of seizures that I see.
Is that your own anecdotal experience? Like with patients you've seen, it's like, hey, between 5 and 15 minutes.
Yes.
Are you familiar with any literature on what those time spans are?
They can be somewhere, well, some people won't have an obvious one. And then I've heard stories, or not heard stories, read that they can last for more than an hour, depending on how bad it was. And sometimes that has to do, my understanding is like, how long were they in what's called status epilepticus? Like you have a patient who was in status epilepticus for a really, really long time, and they finally broke them. They can remain in this sort of postictal, not comatose, but semi-comatose state for quite a while.
So sometimes they can go on for quite a while. You also said that sometimes they're not obvious.
Yes.
And what do you mean by that?
I mean, there's, like my experience with my kid having a febrile seizure, they went back to normal after the seizure.
All right, that pretty much sums up the pertinent parts of that hearing for Jose Gutierrez. Now, the judge ultimately ruled that there was enough evidence to bind him over for trial. Gutierrez has pleaded not guilty, and his case is now going before a death penalty review committee.